Hi, welcome back to Comics Are Awesome, where we bring you everything awesome in comics. It's been a crazy month, and easily the discussion of the industry has been the DC 52 reboot. As such, I'm going to be taking a look at all 10 of my top 5 most and least anticipated books of the DC 52 reboot. I'm also going to do a second video that's going to discuss all the other books I picked up. As I've got a lot of books to cover, let's get cracking.
It's the final countdown.
Like always, I will be discussing spoilers in the show, but I want to make special note that these books are a month or less old, so if you don't want to be spoiled, you can probably still find some or all these books at your local comic store, and all can be purchased legally online. And just in case you missed it, let's take a look at my list.
Not that list, this list!
Least anticipated number 5, Batgirl.
You know, I really struggled with putting Batgirl on my list. The art looked fine, and I really like Gail Simone as a writer. The problem was taking the great role model character of Barbara Gordon and getting her out of the wheelchair and putting her back in the costume again. But even then, I conceded the fact that this would probably be a very entertaining, good read. I was wrong.
To be fair, I won't hold this against Gail, since I strongly suspect that this decision came from DC editorial. But, that said, this book wasn't that great. My biggest problem with it does nothing to justify why Barbara needs to be Batgirl again. There's no reference to previous Batgirls, Cassandra Cain or Stephanie Brown. We get no explanation as to why Barbara regained her ability to walk other than a vague reference to a miracle, which could mean either a plot point for a future story or the writer's way of just saying, "This happened, get over it." And worst of all, I have no feel for who Barbara Gordon is as a person. We don't see her use her hacking skills, and the only thing that sets her apart from any other superhero is that she's suffering from some post-traumatic stress disorder due to her fear of being crippled again. And while this is interesting and novel, it's used in an incredibly stupid way by having her freeze at a critical moment and a cop accuses her of murder because she didn't act. And this is while the actual murderer is in the same room. This just seems like a weak attempt from a writer who is easily capable of much better. While it's possible Gail will do more with this book to help flesh out Barbara and make her a more unique Batgirl, at this point, until I hear about the book improving, I'm going to walk away. 5th most anticipated, Justice League. In my list, I said this book was clearly intended to be DC's marquee title, with a big-name creative team featuring some of the biggest characters of the DC universe, and also being the first of the reboot books to launch. This was clearly the book DC was hedging its bets on, and it was okay. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it, just that it was good when I was expecting something great. This book focused primarily on Green Lantern and Batman, which is, by the way, the 2 best-selling characters before the reboot, with 1 page of Superman and a little bit of Cyborg before he becomes a cyborg. The story, despite being a couple pages longer than average, felt short. Again, nothing wrong with this book, and I suspect as the momentum builds, the story will pick up, and I will be sticking with the title. But there were clearly better books released during the month. Number 4, least anticipated, Suicide Squad.
Listen up, folks. I love comics. I celebrate it as an art form and a medium. And even though there are plenty of comics that just don't work for me, I accept it as exactly that. They just didn't work for me. So when I say that when I finished this book and I wanted to throw it across the room, trust me, it's bad.
Where to begin? I talked in the previous video how I thought all the redesigns for the main characters were ugly or tasteless, but that's just the surface. We also get torture porn on all of our main characters in the first issue. Now this is a book about hardened criminals being forced to join Black Ops Task Force, so some level of squick is to be expected, but traditionally torture in fiction is used one of 2 ways. One is where it reveals something about the character, whether it's hidden strength or they confess something they wouldn't normally say. But since this is the first issue and we're being introduced to these characters, instead it's the second kind, gratuitous violence for no reason other than gratuitous violence. But that's not all. We also get stereotypical Latino gangbanger with fire powers named El Diablo. I really hope they didn't spend all day coming up with that one. And then they took Amanda Waller and changed her from this to this. Amanda the Waller was one of the great unappreciated characters of the DC universe. She's one of the few stout women in comics, full stop, and yet despite this, as a completely normal human, she would give orders in an uncompromising fashion to both heroes and villains. Maybe her personality will remain intact, but part of her appeal was looking like someone's teacher or mother more than someone who could coerce criminals around. Making her skinny and hot, obviously trying to make her resemble Angela Bassett in her role in the Green Lantern film, is taking one of the few unique characters in comics and making her just like everyone else. And might I remind DC that they claimed that this reboot was supposed to create more diversity? And that's why I'm dropping Suicide Squad like the dead weight it is. Number 4, most anticipated, Demon Knights. I went into this thinking this book would be fun, but this exceeded my expectations. This was just pure awesome, and has everything you would want from a sword and sorcery story set in the DC universe. It actually reminds me a lot of several Dungeons & Dragons games I've played in. Several characters from various backgrounds gather in a pub and get dragged into a fight against a warlord. It's simple but never strays too far into cliché. There are several intriguing characters from Jason Blood, who shares his body with a demon Etrigan, the female Shining Knight, Sir Yiston, and the immortal caveman, Vandal Savage. The book manages to be both epic in story and yet will also joke and put readers at ease who aren't used to the more fantastical elements. Seriously, this book strides the border of being a great epic and a comedy, with lines like, "We find the source of our problems and throw dragons at it." A definite recommend. Number 3, least anticipated, Red Hood and the Outlaws. I could spend the entire episode ranting about this issue, but luckily there's already a guy for that. I will say that the art didn't impress me, and the characters were written way off mile for me. Jason Red Hood Todd, who in the past was a traumatized gun-wielding maniac, come off as the most easygoing and likable of the group. Roy Arsenal Harper is written as a dumb toady, someone just killing people for Red Hood because he has nothing better to do. And then there's Starfire.
Let me be clear. I have no problem with sexually empowered women, or those in open relationships. I am not here to judge anyone. Except for you, Mr. Lobdell, because fuck you!
When I gave my initial thoughts of this book, I thought the biggest issue was that it looked like it was trying to be extreme! But not in the way I expected. No, it takes Starfire. No, I refuse to acknowledge her by that name. I'm gonna call her Sexfire, because that's her role here. She blows shit up, and she sleeps with the boys. Jason refers to her by her breasts. Sexfire sleeps around because she sees all humans as basically the same, and Roy asks her about her history on Teen Titans, which she seems to acknowledge that their history is there more or less intact, except she can't remember her time there. This isn't treated as amnesia, it's just that it has no consequence to her. The hell? She almost married Nightwing in that book. Oh, and Roy, it's bad enough that you're hanging out with a guy who's tried to kill one of your best friends several times, but you're also sleeping with his ex-fiancée? How the hell am I supposed to identify or supposed to like anyone here? So no, I don't recommend this one.
I hope they burn in hell!
Third most anticipated, Blue Beetle. This was okay, not great. This pretty much just retells the origin of Blue Beetle, changing a few details, but mostly keeping everything intact. There is a bit of a heavier Latino influence on the book than previously, and yes, I will admit I mistakenly pronounced Jaime's name as Jamie previously, even though I know better. My bad. This is okay. It offers very little new for the established Blue Beetle fans, but if you enjoyed Jaime on Batman Brave and the Bold, or just heard Linkaro's recommendation for the book previously, this is probably a good enough jumping on point, but I think I'll personally be trying to pick this up in trade paperback collection rather than monthly issues. Number 2, least anticipated, Teen Titans. Compared to the last book from Scott Lobdell, this was better, but still not great. I don't know. The concept is okay, I suppose. A group of bad guys is hunting down teenage superheroes, and Tim Drake, previously Robin and now going under the mantle of Red Robin, decides to find them first. It's not bad, but it feels cliche, and not enough happens to really sell me on it. If you're a fan of Teen Titans, there's nothing here that's going to upset you, and it certainly seems like an improvement on some of the stories we got after Jeff Johns left the book during the previous volume. So this might be worth your while, but to new fans, I suggest the Johns run of Teen Titans, and personally, I'm not picking up the next issue. Second most anticipated, Batwoman. Finally I got this book in my hands, and it's great. I've raved about J.H. Williams' art a few times on the show, so I'll simply say that this lives up to his past efforts. It's beautiful, well laid out, and sometimes will change style in the middle of the pages to better suit the story, but never becomes distracting. The story is fine, though a large portion was basically catching up people to the basics of the character for those who didn't read the Batwoman comic arc in Detective Comics. It does seem interesting that the last story in her introductory story in 52 had her dealing with shape-shifting were-critters, and this story seems to be dealing with a vengeful ghost. While Batman has a few superpowered enemies like Clayface and Mr. Freeze, most of his rogues-galleys are actually just deformed psychopaths with gimmicks. It would give Kate Kane an interesting niche to fill if she becomes Gotham's go-to defense for the more supernatural criminals and ghoulish predators. I definitely recommend checking this book out. Number 1, least anticipated, Deathstroke.
You know, sometimes you have to admit when you're wrong. The whole reason I came back and reviewed all these books was so that way I can give them all a fair shot. So did this book win me over? No, it didn't.
I will say this. It's less bad than I expected. The story is mostly serviceable as these things are concerned. The experienced Deathstroke leads a young team of assassins to take out a target while it's in a plane over the ocean. It certainly tells its action sequences well enough, has an unexpected twist or two, and is entertaining in a popcorn film type of way. And while I'm still not a fan of Deathstroke's new costume, the rest of the art is actually quite decent. The problem is in the writing. The book is obsessed with letting you know Deathstroke is a badass. It beats you over the head with it. It doesn't just show him acting like a badass, but tells you, in no uncertain terms, how badass he is. Badass Deathstroke is so badass that he badass. Ugh, the words lost all meaning for me. The book isn't as awful as I expected, but this is definitely not a book I'm going to continue to read, and one I can't recommend when there are so many other better books out there. And my number 1 most anticipated, Action Comics. Well, at least I can go out on a positive note. This series easily lived up to my expectations. I loved this book from beginning to end. If you watched my All-Star Superman review, you'll remember that book was written as a tribute to the over-the-top goofiness of the Silver Age. Well, this book is a nod to the beginning of Superman, the golden age of comics, a crusader of social justice, fighting abused husbands and corrupt businessmen who use dangerous work environments. And this Superman is the less of a goody two-shoes. He shows a lot of anger and arrogance, but the type that I've seen in a lot of young political crusaders who believe in a cause strongly but perhaps don't have the experience to know when to control their tempers. I strongly suspect that Grant Morrison is building towards this angry young Superman eventually growing into the one we know and love. But it's really refreshing to see him grow into that role instead of how he's been portrayed most of the time, as a Boy Scout from Smallville who came to Metropolis more or less perfect.
Action Comics is the poster child that Justice League should have been. This is a great comic and I highly recommend it to everyone. So go seek it out and stay tuned for my next video where I'm going to discuss all the books that didn't manage to make it onto this list that I picked up. I'm also going to discuss the reboot as a whole. And so remember, comics are awesome and we're going to get the word out.
It's the